I lost everything. My wife, my son's smile, and even hope. Lucas Bennett, a single millionaire, thought as he looked at Oliver, the 7-year-old boy who had fallen silent after his mother's death. Every night, Lucas wondered, will my son ever speak again? He spent millions of dollars, but nothing could break the invisible wall surrounding his son. Then, at a small cafe in Boise, Idaho, a waitress named Clara spilled water on Oliver's drawing and apologized. 3 small words from the boy made Lucas's entire world freeze. What happened next? All right, my dear audience, stay tuned for a story that will leave you in awe. Take a second to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see people joining us from all over the world. The glass-covered mansion facing the pine forest west of Boise stood silent, much like its owner. Each morning, sunlight pierced through thin curtains, casting a pale, golden glow on the cold wooden floor, illuminating the small figure sitting by the window, Oliver. 7 years old, his legs tucked up on the armchair, his eyes gazing far off into a place no one knew. Lucas Bennett stood behind his son, a short distance away that felt like an eternity. He didn't speak. Not anymore. He had learned that sometimes silence was the only thing his son could accept, and sometimes it was the very thing that killed him bit by bit. Oliver had once been a tireless questioner, from silly things like, "Why don't birds go to school?" to bigger matters like, "Do you think Mom would like this cake?" The boy had been the liveliest sound in this house. Now, the entire house echoed with the ticking of the wall clock. With every sigh Lucas tried to swallow, 8 months had passed since the plane carrying Emily never landed. No one in the rescue team found anything intact: a mangled wedding ring, a blood-stained piece of a shirt, and an indelible scar in the heart of a man who once believed love was invincible. Emily was everything. Not just the wife he loved to the core, but the only one who knew how to make Lucas Bennett, the cold tech mogul in the eyes of the media, laugh in the middle of the night over a trivial story. When she was gone, the world lost its light. But what Lucas couldn't overcome wasn't Emily's death. It was his inability to do anything as he watched Oliver vanish, not in body, but in soul. The boy no longer spoke. He didn't react to the music his mother used to sing. He didn't cry when Lucas tried to take him along the lake where the 3 of them once camped. Just silence. As if the boy was living somewhere, between a dream and hell, with the door back to reality slammed shut. Lucas once thought money could solve everything. When Oliver was diagnosed with selective mutism due to psychological trauma, he spared no expense. The best therapists from Seattle, personalized treatment programs in San Francisco, even a speech recovery specialist from New York. All were brought in with one sole purpose: to break the wall of silence imprisoning his child. But each left with the same look: helplessness. Every evening, as the city lights faded behind the mountains, Lucas sat alone on the sofa, holding an untouched glass of whiskey, his eyes fixed on a photo of the 3 of them from last Christmas. Emily, beaming, her hair tousled by the wind. Oliver on his shoulders, arms raised as if to embrace the sky. Now, that entire sky had collapsed. Lucas had once been an icon of success, a man who turned a garage into a billion-dollar startup. But here, there was no CEO, no spotlight, no venture capital projects. Only a father standing amid the ruins of memories, trying to hold on to the only remaining piece of love, his son, who no longer spoke,
no longer smiled. And deep in those endless nights, as hope faded with each heavy breath, Lucas still quietly prayed, "You're still there, aren't you? Oliver, just one sign, one glance. Just let me know you can still hear me." By the window, Oliver didn't turn his head. But a small leaf suddenly fell into his palm, and for a fleeting second, Lucas saw his son's eyes flicker. Just a moment. But perhaps that was where the pain ended, and the journey of hope began.
That morning, the sky was silent, as if it had nothing to say. The ground was damp and musty after a light overnight rain, and the wind swept through the pine trees along the road, scattering fallen leaves and carrying a chill that seeped into every crevice of clothing. Lucas drove aimlessly, as he had been doing lately when staying at home only made him feel more suffocated. The white walls, the familiar armchair, the glass window where Oliver sat, all of them seemed to etch into his mind the image of an inescapable loss. Oliver remained silent. Throughout the long drive, not a sound came from the back seat. The boy was like a lost soul within his own body, bearing the appearance of a 7-year-old, but with eyes as empty as someone who had endured many seasons of pain. The car quietly rolled into a small town, a place Lucas didn't recall ever visiting, nor did he have any reason to stop. But there was something about the weathered charm of the houses, the slow pace of life among the locals, that made him feel less pursued by his own helplessness. As he turned the wheel through a quiet street corner, his eyes caught a faded wooden sign hanging under an awning covered in golden leaves. Sunrise Brew. A simple name, as if it didn't need to impress anyone. The cafe's glass door was fogged with mist, and from within, a soft yellow light glowed, enough to make his heart momentarily soften. Without a word, Lucas parked the car. Oliver followed him into the cafe, his small shoes stepping lightly on the old wooden floor, producing a strangely quiet sound. Inside, the place carried the scent of a morning he had long forgotten. Freshly baked bread, melting butter, and darkly roasted coffee. The space wasn't large, but it was warm. Warm not because of the temperature, but because of a gentle presence that seemed to permeate every corner. From behind the counter, a young woman stepped out, unhurried, unpretentious. The golden light gently touched her high-tied hair and bare skin. She approached, placed the menu on the table, and offered nothing more than a simple, polite greeting. No questions, no probing, no pitying looks that other adults often gave when they saw Oliver's silence. Lucas only nodded slightly. Coffee for him. Something sweet for his son, perhaps. But what caught his attention wasn't the drink. It was the way the woman faced Oliver, not trying to start a conversation, nor attempting to break the silence. Just quietly present, as if she understood that some wounds didn't need words, only space to breathe. A cup of cocoa was brought out, placed neatly in front of the boy. A swirl of whipped cream sat lightly on top, dusted with cocoa powder like the first snow of the season. Oliver looked down, his eyes wavering ever so slightly, just for a moment. But Lucas noticed. It wasn't interest, just a glance. But in a world where all signals had gone dark, a single glance could be the first spark of light. Lucas said nothing. He sat there, hands gripping the hot coffee cup, the gentle bitterness touching his throat. A soft breeze slipped through a crack in the door, making the small bell near the glass frame tinkle. Everything remained quiet, but no longer heavy. Just a slow autumn morning passing by. In that slowness, Lucas felt something crack, not sure where. Perhaps in his heart. Perhaps in Oliver's prolonged silence. Perhaps in the presence of that woman whose kindness needed no reason, who had stepped into their lives without making a sound. A brief encounter, but it carried something he couldn't name. All he knew was that, on this journey to find his son again, for the first time, he didn't feel alone. He couldn't recall exactly when it began, but taking Oliver to the cafe every weekend had become a quiet routine, one that no one named. It wasn't hope. It wasn't therapy anymore. It was simply the only place where he didn't feel like he was failing. Lucas had given up expecting anything tangible, a word, a hug, a tear, any sign that his son was still present in this world. But since that first visit to Sunrise Brew, he began noticing changes too subtle for outsiders to see, yet too significant for a father's heart to ignore. Oliver sat as silently as ever, but he no longer avoided others' gazes. He still didn't smile, but he didn't turn away when he heard Clara's voice. Still wordless, but sometimes his hands no longer clenched tightly under the table. To others, it was nothing. To Lucas, it was the first echo of a child once silenced by pain. Clara never asked, never pressed for anything. She simply left small things on the table, a star-shaped cookie, a cat drawn on a napkin, or a silly handwritten note. No explanations, no expectation of a response. Everything was placed with a quiet kindness that made Lucas wonder whether she did it for Oliver or because she, too, believed silence didn't mean the end. And then, one morning, everything changed. Clara brought out a piece of napkin with a simple maze drawn on it, a little cat at one end, a spaceship at the other. She said nothing, just set it down, and walked away. Lucas sat across from his son, as he had so many times before, expecting nothing. He had grown used to looking at Oliver as if staring at a locked door. But that morning, the boy's hand suddenly twitched. A movement so small it might have been accidental or deliberate. Then, that hand, the hand that had once been cold in countless unreturned grips, slowly picked up the pencil on the table. Lucas couldn't breathe. Oliver leaned down, drawing a faint line guiding the cat through the maze. Not smooth, not straight, but a path, a response. A small movement that, to Lucas, was the first explosion in the desert of silence that had stretched on for months. He said nothing, didn't dare, just sat there, watching his son as if he himself were dreaming. No one had taught Lucas what to do when faced with a miracle, especially when the miracle didn't come with a cry or a call of dad as he'd imagined, but with a trembling pencil line on paper. After that, the small things became signals. Oliver still didn't speak, but sometimes he kept the napkin with the drawing. At times, Lucas saw him turn a cookie in his hand before eating, as if quietly exploring its shape. Once, he handed Clara a scribbled drawing. No name, no words, just a picture of a small cat sitting on top of a planet. Lucas saw it all, and he understood. Clara wasn't healing his son. She had no magic. But with her unconditional patience, with her presence that asked for nothing in return, she had done something none of the expensive experts ever managed. She awakened Oliver's presence without touching his pain. No miracle arrived with a thunderclap. Only small, very small movements, enough to shake a heart rotting from helplessness. And Lucas, for the first time in a long while, found himself daring to hope. Not for his son to speak, but for something greater. The return of light in eyes that had once gone dim. Dear audience, take a moment to relax or grab a glass of water, then keep listening to the story. There are still surprises ahead. Comment 1 if you're loving the story, so we know you're still with us. The rain that morning wasn't heavy but steady and cold. The droplets fell slantwise with the wind, blurring the glass windows like soft veins on the face of time. Lucas was used to the gray skies of late autumn, but today, as the car pulled up in front of Sunrise Brew, his heart felt strange, calm in a way he couldn't tell was from exhaustion or anticipation. Oliver sat beside him, clutching a folded drawing with unusual care. The thin paper, its edges slightly curled, was held close to his chest as if it were something precious. Lucas didn't ask. He had learned not to intrude on the inner world his son was slowly rebuilding. Everything unfolded in silence, in layers of elusive emotions, yet undeniably present. Inside the cafe, it was busier than usual. The wooden tables were fully occupied. The hum of conversation filled the air, and the scent of freshly baked pastries mingled with the smell of wet coats and warm coffee. Clara moved back and forth between tables, still wearing her familiar smile, but clearly more rushed than on other weeks. Lucas and Oliver sat at their usual table by the window. The space was the same, but something in the light reflecting off the wet tabletop made his heart feel softer than usual. A moment later, Clara approached, hands busy with a tray and a quick nod in place of a greeting. For a brief second, her eyes landed on the paper in Oliver's hands. Not curious, just a warm glance, fleeting. Then, everything happened unexpectedly. A slight collision between Clara and the edge of the table caused the glass of water on her tray to tip, then slide onto the table as if in slow motion. The water spread quickly, pooling like a cold ink stain, and within seconds, the edge of Oliver's drawing was soaked. Lucas hadn't even reacted when Clara froze, her eyes widening for a moment. Gone was the smile. Gone was the deft ease of an experienced server. All that remained was the genuine panic of someone who had just crossed a fragile boundary between presence and harm. She crouched down, almost kneeling beside the boy, her voice soft and urgent. The apology rang out, lost amid the cafe's noisy hum. Lucas didn't catch every word, only felt his heartbeat slow. He didn't look at Clara. His eyes were fixed on his son, Oliver, staring at the drawing. The sketch of a small airplane among clouds had blurred at one corner. But he didn't cry, didn't flinch, didn't turn away. He just looked. Then, something no one expected happened. A sound so faint and delicate, it was like a breeze slipping through a crack in the door. But Lucas heard it clearly, clear enough to make his heart stop. "It's okay." 3 words, light enough to tremble in the air of that rainy morning, but heavy with the weight of an entire sky. Lucas wasn't sure if he'd misheard, but Clara froze, blinking rapidly. Her hand trembled slightly as she placed a new sheet of paper on the table. A second later, she smiled, a smile that hid nothing, a raw emotion adults rarely hold on to. Lucas felt his blood rush back to his heart after a long time of being suppressed. His hands shook, not from the cold, but from an unnamed emotion surging too suddenly. He had thought he was ready for that moment, but in truth, nothing could prepare him for hearing his son's voice again after months of living in silence. Oliver didn't say anything more. He only lowered his head, touched the wet drawing, then looked at Clara as if to confirm that everything was truly okay. Lucas swallowed something caught in his throat. Inside him, something had melted. Not just the ice around his son, but around himself. The father who had once thought he'd lost the ability to hope forever. Just 3 words, but 3 words that shifted the entire world. After that rainy morning, something in Oliver had changed. Not brightly, not explosively, but quietly, like the way dawn slips through thick clouds, slow, gentle, but unmistakable. The boy didn't speak much, but he began to draw. At first, they were simple sketches like before. Airplanes, fluffy clouds, stars colored in pale blue. Then, gradually, Oliver's inner world expanded with each piece of paper. New details emerged, a high-tide ponytail appearing behind the cockpit, eyes curved gently as if smiling, an apron speckled with flour. Clara had stepped into those drawings like a familiar figure in a shared dream. Lucas saw his son drawing at home, too. On the wooden living room floor, at the dining table, even on the backs of bills he hadn't yet put away. Each time he watched Oliver focus on his pencil, Lucas felt as if he were being allowed a glimpse into a world he once thought was locked away forever. Clara never asked questions. She simply left a new box of crayons, a few small sketch pads, and sometimes a star-shaped cookie placed on the table without a word. But Lucas noticed that her eyes, when looking at Oliver's drawings, held more than just joy. At times, in fleeting moments when the boy wasn't watching, Lucas saw Clara pause, as if someone had touched an old, fragile string in her memory. One weekend, when the cafe was quieter than usual, Clara sat down across from Lucas. They didn't talk much, but this time she spoke first. The story she shared left Lucas silent for a moment. She spoke of her younger sister, Lily, who had been silent for nearly 2 years after their father abandoned the family. No crying, no questions, just fading into daily life like a shadow. "I didn't try to pull Lily out of her world," Clara said, her eyes distant, her voice not sad but full of truth. "I just played beside her, letting her know I was there, even if she didn't look at me." Lucas listened and realized Clara wasn't just kind to Oliver. She understood. Not with reason, but with a pain that had once touched her own life. A pain that didn't need to be explained, only quietly felt. A few weeks later, as winter began to brush lightly against the cafe's windows, Oliver brought a drawing carefully tucked into a thin plastic sleeve. He didn't say anything when he handed it to Clara. He just placed it on the table, then stepped back, eyes slightly lowered. Lucas hadn't seen it yet when Clara opened it. He saw her lips pressed tightly together, her hands gripping the paper's edge as if afraid to crease it. The drawing showed a simple airplane flying among stars. In the cockpit were 3 people: a man, a boy wearing a pilot's cap, and a woman with a high ponytail, smiling. No name, no explanation. But Lucas knew the meaning of every line. Clara held the drawing to her chest, unashamed, and silent tears slid down her cheeks. No one spoke. In that moment, silence no longer bore the shape of pain. It became a language of its own, where the most important things were said without being spoken. "This is the best flight crew I've ever seen," Clara whispered. Her voice was soft enough to be almost for herself alone. But Lucas heard, and his heart quietly softened. It wasn't just a drawing. For Oliver, it was a door. For Clara, it was healing. And for Lucas, it was his son's first thank you. Not with words, not with a hug, but with a single act strong enough to push back the darkness that had enveloped their family for months. From that moment, Lucas stopped asking himself whether Oliver would fully speak again or become normal like other children. Because for him, the important thing had happened. His son was returning step by step, drawing by drawing, with every quiet moment warmed by the presence of love. Some pains don't disappear. They merely change form quietly. Like light slipping through the darkness, not loud, not dazzling, but enough to help someone find their way again. Lucas understood this, but it took a long journey. When Oliver began speaking again, when the kitchen filled with drawings of imaginary flight crews, when Clara became an indispensable part of their weekend mornings, something in him shifted too. Not instant happiness, but the revival of something long dead. The belief that he could still create something kind for someone other than himself. He called the organization Silent Stars. No long discussions, no overthinking its meaning. The name came to him one night as he watched Oliver draw nameless stars against a pale purple sky. Children like his son, who had lived in silence, isolated in a noisy world, they weren't invisible. They were just waiting for someone who knew how to look with patience. Lucas hadn't planned to ask Clara, but when he placed the first draft of the program on the table and caught Oliver's gaze toward her, shining with a light he had only seen when Emily was alive, he knew. No one was more fitting. Clara agreed without needing much reason. She began organizing small workshops. No blackboards, no rigid chairs, no introductions required. Children came and drew. Some cried. Some sat silently through the sessions. But she didn't push. She simply stayed present, placing crayons on the table, telling stories about singing bread or cats living on the moon. And little by little, small hands reached up. Sparse laughter echoed from the corners of the room. Eyes found each other in a space once rigid with silence. Lucas watched it all from the sidelines. At times, he stood still. Not because miracles were happening, but because of their simplicity. No interventions from psychologists. No machines. Just the presence of someone patient enough not to ask, "When will you be okay?" Then one evening, as winter's breeze began to drift in from the mountains, Lucas and Oliver sat outside. Father and son looked up at the sky. Above, familiar stars twinkled, and in that quiet moment, Lucas realized he was breathing easier. No longer straining to be a father. No longer weighed down by guilt over things he couldn't change. Oliver didn't speak for a long while. He just sat beside him, his legs swinging lightly on the long wooden bench, holding a pillow embroidered with an alien cat Clara had once described. And then, sudden as a gentle breeze, he spoke softly. "Dad, I think Mom would like Clara too." Lucas turned to him. He didn't smile, didn't react. Just a long pause between two breaths. Then tears began to fall. He didn't know what he was crying for. Because his son had just said something filled with understanding, because Emily still lived somewhere in his world, or because of the tenderness he showed for the woman who had entered their lives without asking for anything. He nodded, hiding his trembling hand in the dark. "You know, I think so too." In that moment, Lucas understood something he had only vaguely felt before. Healing doesn't begin with a voice regained, but with love allowed to exist. Love that isn't perfect. Love that doesn't replace anyone. But love that can weave back together the fragments pain once tore apart. Clara didn't come to save Oliver. She came and quietly stayed. And with her unconditional kindness, she helped his son not only speak again, but dare to believe there was still room in life for new people, even if the old ones never faded. Lucas, for the first time since losing Emily, found himself forgiving. Not fate, not the past, but himself, the man who once thought he didn't deserve to be loved again. Some losses never fully heal. But through the journey of Lucas, Oliver, and Clara, we learn this. Healing isn't about forgetting pain, but about learning to live with it. Through kindness, patience, and unconditional love. In a world too noisy, sometimes what a child needs most isn't advice or answers, but the quiet presence of someone willing to stay, silently. And sometimes, what an adult needs most isn't salvation, but the chance to forgive themselves. This story isn't just for those who have known loss, but for anyone searching for their voice in their own life. If Lucas's story touched you, please leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, or just a single dot, to let us know you're here and you're listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to spread the love. Because somewhere out there, someone might be waiting to be healed. Thank you for staying until the very end.